Good evening. At this time, I call to order the business meeting for the Faribault Public Schools School Board here on May 20th, 2024. Our call to order, Ms. Steves, do we have a quorum present?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we do.
Thank you. Would everyone remove your hats and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We welcome all of you who are here present in person and those who are viewing online. Agenda item number 2 is approval of the agenda. Could I entertain a motion for approval of the agenda? So moved. Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau, for the second. No discussion. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item number 3 is recognition, awards, and presentations. There are none. Items of information, report, student board representative. They're both an extracurricular activity, so busy time of the year for them. 4B, school board members. I'll open it up first. We want to go first. Anybody have anything?
I'll go, but I can go second.
Go ahead, Mr. Wolf.
I just want to say that I believe it was, boy, time flies. I don't know, was it the 13th? No, it wasn't the 13th. Anyway, a couple of weeks ago, within the last couple of weeks, we had the annual awards banquet night, whatever you want to call it, at the high school. And I believe upwards of $249,000 was awarded to graduating seniors. And it's just a remarkable amount of money given out to these young, outstanding students. And if you haven't been to one of those yet, it lasts about 2.5 hours. You'll enjoy every minute of it, but they do have comfortable chairs there. But it's just really, really a great thing to see. I know there's people that travel from out of state to give scholarships each and every year, and it's a big deal to their families, and it's a big deal to our graduating students. And so anyway, just the people that put that on and the award winners, hats off to all of them. And you know, if you're not excited about the future, I get it. There's some things, some days are a little gray and dreary at times, but the amount of talent on our stage and other stages throughout the state and the country is just remarkable. So it was a great night. I was happy to be there.
Ms. Moore.
Mr. Chair, yes, I actually have 3 items to address, and I'll try to make it quick. I know that one issue is about the radio frequencies. Several authors are becoming concerned with the effects of exposure to the radio frequencies and electromagnetic fields by the use of wireless devices. I know one study I looked at today showed the effects on children and adults, and the authors noted in their lit review that exposure to all of these frequencies, electromagnetic fields, had an adverse biological effect depending on current intensity, strength of the magnetic field, and duration of exposure. Now, has been accumulated epidemiological evidence indicates a correlation between exposure to all of this and childhood cancer incidence, Alzheimer's disease, and miscarriage. In lieu of all these concerns, I think that it would be wise to look into such, and they do have devices out there, such as I have on my phone, as this that can possibly alleviate the effects of these magnetic fields. So in fact, I spoke to Mr. Benty and have requested a meeting with Mr. Birding soon to address all of this and see if we can come up with some satisfactory solutions to lessen some of the effects. That's the first item. Also, from a number of people, there seems to be concern over the wellness policy, specifically the nutritional aspect. They're objecting to the stringent requirements set forth by the whole child approach regarding nutritional snacks and the possibility of schools overstepping their bounds. I know that Janet and Zach will be addressing us tonight with the whole child wellness issue, and maybe they can talk about this a little bit. I think we got an email just recently too about that. However, I do have 5 pages of questions from a parent. And in the interest of time, maybe at some point, if we don't get them all answered, we can have more of a detailed report from the Wellness Committee members, maybe at the next work session or whatever. Third thing is there was a clarification on cutting the ag program. I received some information on that email, specifically the summer ag program. And I spoke last week with Superintendent Benty and asked him to explain the ag situation within our district as it now stands, because there might be some confusion on that, and I don't know, hopefully you have some answers. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Anything else, Ms. Boudreau, Ms. Steves, anything?
I would just like to dovetail on Chad's message about the scholarships. I want to thank all those who offered scholarships to our students. There's so many that are offered, and it is so exciting to see someone vying for a scholarship and getting them, and experienced with my own grands. And I just want to thank all of those entities because there's so many.
Guessing nothing? Well, I have quite a list. Shocking, I'm sure, to some of you, but first of all, this time of year, just again, our students just shine. And I'm going to piggyback off what Mr. Wolf and Ms. Boudreau have said, that talent galore in this district, and the senior awards night, like you said, close to some thousand, over $200,000, $249,000 of scholarships. I was proud to present to a student the Faribault Public Schools School Board Scholarship. We have a $1,500 scholarship, so I thank those school board members for contributing to that. A phenomenal night. Also, the Big Nine Music Festival. I was invited to, we were all invited, but I went to and Ms. Boudreau as well, went to the evening dinner, meeting the conductors, et cetera, and then the performance. And oh my gosh, we're talking the best of the best. What a performance. What a crowd from all Big Nine schools, from all the area, and the conductors from St. Olaf, and I'm going to say one from out east somewhere as well.
There were 2 from St. Olaf.
2 from St. Olaf, whatever, but just phenomenal. And the kids responded, and what pride. So what talent we have in the Big Nine and in Faribault. Also, I've attended more things here at the middle school, the band, orchestra, and choir concerts. Wow. Now I know why the high school choir is really good. We have some really talented kids and even more talented conductors and teachers for those, and I thank them for all their work. Other great things happening, the ag program. I see they had an ag day, I think that was Friday, drove their tractors and things, but if you followed along on Facebook, the FFA winning awards at the state FFA convention, second place, first place, their judging teams, whatever, just phenomenal of the things that's what's happening here. So getting a little more down in the weeds, I want to congratulate the people who are retiring and who will no longer be with us. First of all, I just have to say congratulations and best wishes to Faribault Middle School Counselor Brent Hawkins. He's moving on. Brent and I worked together for a long time when I taught, and the things he's done for kids here in Faribault and the middle school and academics and athletics is second to none. Also, as we get into this, we also have 4 retirements today from very important people who have put a lot of time in this district. Barb Boudal, Val Dozell, Judy Johnson, and Guadalupe Porras. I didn't add up the number of years of service they've given to this district, but each in their own way gave a lot to kids in the district and the community of Faribault. So congratulations on your retirement. I was honored to work with Barb, Val, and Judy at the middle school and district office for many years. So, and the things that they've done and the rewards there. So congratulations, and I just want to say thanks for your longevity and your dedication to Faribault Public Schools. With that, Mr. Benty, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I echo everything that you've said around the amazing things that are going on right now with concerts and activities and field trips. May is the month for a lot of field trips. I know we had students out at Riverbend Nature Center today even. So we have students that are learning in all different areas right now. One of the great things that I get to do is every year, third graders will send me persuasive essays on what they would like to see done better in the district. And they are very well thought out and they are very well written. And I will say they are very persuasive in what they want. And so this year I thought what I would do is give you an idea. So the winner by far this year was that they wanted 1 day per week for an e-learning day. And they thought Wednesday was a good day for that, where they could just stay home and learn from home. And they gave lots of different reasons around saving electricity and transportation and all those types of things. But that was by far the number one. The second most popular was actually a tie for, and remember this is elementary students, for taking their iPads home or getting FIED more often. Those were the two that were definitely in second place, followed up with more computer time. And then what I thought was a very interesting one is this came from Jefferson Elementary students, and I actually talked with Mr. Gertis and Mr. Pruitt about it, was they said they wanted a fence that ran along Prairie because when they're playing soccer, the ball goes onto the road and they can't go into the road to get it. So I thought that was a really interesting idea. So that's a highlight, is getting to read those. And then I respond to each one of them individually too. So coming up this week, we have adult ed graduation on Thursday, and we have our ALC graduation on Friday. And I just noticed those were not in the bulletin that I see on here. So I just wanted to remind people around that, along with our high school graduation that'll be on Sunday, June 2nd. So last day for seniors is this Friday, and then last day for all students is next Friday. So we are within the last 2 weeks of the school year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Benty.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Benty, could you just address the situation with, we had I had an email from or communication from someone about the ag program. Could you just clarify? I don't know if there's misinformation out there.
So the ag program it's not the ag program, it's the summer stipend that was reduced during the budget reductions. There was work and a grant that was achieved to bring that back. However, there were some issues with the grant, and I was supposed to have a meeting Friday. That meeting unfortunately got canceled, so I don't have an update on what the issues are with the grant. I just know there are issues with the grant around funding for that. So, and I know that we're looking into other possibilities.
And if you get more information, would you mind sending that to me? Because I have a constituent that did give me a call, and I'd like to get back to this person. Thank you.
Board members will now move to agenda item number 5, the public comment. And we have one person for public comment today, and that's Ms. Carolyn Treadway. And her topic is teacher morale. Good evening.
Hi. I serve as an on-call substitute throughout the Faribault schools, and for the most part, I have thoroughly enjoyed my time with Faribault students. Truly extraordinary instructional and support staff serve our students. There are a few issues, however, that I hear repeatedly from staff that reflect a being done to practice rather than a working with model. This is having a dramatic effect on the morale of staff members. Teachers are unable to impose consequences for a student's classroom misbehavior or unwillingness to work. You can imagine the frustration that causes. Who's in charge in a classroom? Certainly not the teacher. Teachers indicate that some students are chronically absent or tardy. A high school student can wander in 20 minutes late on a regular basis and suffers no consequences. The same can be said at all levels about chronic absenteeism. Some students have missed 30, 40, or more days with no consequences to them or their parents for allowing it. How can teachers ensure a student's proficiency if the child is absent 6 weeks or more of a school year? Other districts report chronic absenteeism to county social services. That practice used to be in place at FPS, but apparently no longer is. Mandates about behavior, program modifications, as well as hiring staff reside solely in the hands of principals and other administrators. For instance, when teachers help with staff interviews, they feel left out of the ultimate decision about who will be hired. Instead, the decision is made unilaterally by the principal. That isn't shared decision-making. Unfortunately, the teacher's lack of agency is pushing some of Faribault's best teachers to call it quits. I was dismayed to learn that a 30-year veteran who is widely recognized as one of the district's best is giving it one more year and then he's finding other work. Other teachers are simply going to other districts where their expertise will be valued. And most importantly, none of this is good for kids. If you'd raised your kids without loving and logical consequences for misbehavior, they'd have been chronically in a state of freefall. Kids need boundaries and depend on the adults in their lives to set them. No one is advocating for draconian consequences for students, yet the job satisfaction of staff, as well as the well-being of their students, is dependent on reasonable expectations and consequences. So I ask you, board members, to initiate some informal conversations with staff. They need to be heard.
Thank you, Ms. Treadway. Next, we'll move on to agenda item number 6, the consent agenda. The consent agenda consists of the minutes from the April 22nd, 2024 and May 6th, 2024 business meeting and work session, employment, additional assignments, other, authorization of payments, transfers, and investment account, and retirements. Could I have a motion for approval of the consent agenda? Thank you, Ms. Steves. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item number 7 is our District Advisory Committee. There's no report tonight. Agenda item number 8 is the Policy Committee. Policy Committee report, and I will turn it over to our Policy Committee board members, Cassie Steves and Linda Moore.
Did you want to go first? Because I wasn't there, but I did have some questions ahead of time. So
Sure.
I'm just going to mention something if I miss it.
Yep.
Okay.
So the policy minutes are here on board book. It was a quick meeting. Everyone in attendance had their questions ready to be asked. Video is also posted on YouTube.
And I just would like to point out in the minutes, I think it's self-explanatory, but it said policy 540 was tabled. And that is a work in progress that we will be getting back to that. And we also tabled policy 308, administrator, director evaluation. And we're kind of waiting for the legislation to address that, and also the MSBA. So that's why they were tabled. I'm correct on that, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So I will ask you two and Mr. Benty, if we could just review, since it's first reading, policy 533 on wellness. I know we all received some emails and there's been some discussion regarding snacks. How's that? So if we could just, for the public's sake, if we just dive into that a little bit on that particular policy, I think that would be good for everyone to be refreshed on that.
Do we need to pull it out before we,
No, this is just first reading, so we can discuss at will.
Mr. Benty, do you want
So Janet did a lot of the authoring on the rewrite of this policy. So if, with your permission, Mr. Chair, if she could come up and answer some of the questions
That would
that
be
you
very
have,
good.
because she understands them better, and then I will fill in as necessary.
That'd be great.
So I believe, Mr. Chair, if I remember from our conversation earlier, what you're looking at is page, is it 536? Or section, let's go that way, section 4B, nope, 4D, talking about 4D 1B, talking about classroom snacks will not be allowed to be brought by caregivers. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, so one of the clarifications around that is that that is entire classroom snacks. That is not individual classroom snacks. So I wanted to make sure that that was clarified, that parents, students are allowed to bring their own snacks. A person is not allowed to bring snacks for the entire class under this policy. So, and I think the next one then was part C of that same area, which was around bringing any type of food into the classroom for a celebration or birthday or any reason, really. So, and I'll let Janet talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I can simply reiterate what Mr. Benty has said, that the part B is not to say that students can't bring in their own snacks, that families can certainly send snacks with their students still. That's the same thing as packing lunch. The issue is more about bringing in a snack for the whole class, right? Because then we start getting into concerns around having to meet the smart snack standards in addition to allergies. And now you've got a classroom teacher who's responsible for determining from a health perspective whether or not food meets the criteria of a student who might have allergies in their class. And that's one more thing we're asking teachers to do that they're not trained to do. And so we're a little bit late to the game on this policy in terms of other districts, right? That this is a pretty common practice across most districts at this point, is that families don't bring treats and snacks and things into the classrooms anymore. So I don't know if folks have.
So, and also in the emails that I read, they said this is to be compliant also with the USDA and statute, Minnesota statute regarding snacks in the room and.
Yeah, so any any food that is not provided through the meal service program but is provided during the school day, is considered by federal guidelines a competitive food. And competitive foods, whether they are provided free of charge or sold to students, they still are competing with the food programs that exist in the building. And so they are required to meet the smart snack standards. So even if we were to say we don't like this part of the policy and we want to allow families to be able to bring snacks in, they would have to meet the smart snack standards, which then means you've got to have somebody who's checking that every time a parent or somebody brings snacks in for the whole class. And I'm not sure how we decide whose job it is to be checking all of the snacks with the smart snack calculator that the USDA provides. That's a lot of work to ask a building administrator or a classroom teacher to do.
Along with the fact that most of them are qualified to do that.
Have we had recent issues, or is this just, we saw it in our policy and we're addressing it?
So-
I'm not aware.
This is one of the pieces that has been brought up in the past and has kind of been, it has been in there in the past, but hasn't necessarily been enforced. So it's one of the pieces that, as Janet alluded to, we are kind of walking that fine line on I shouldn't even say that. We're not doing what we need to be doing when it comes to requirements from the federal government and the USDA around snacks in the classroom.
One-
I would add to that. Got it. Sorry. Should know better. I would add too that about 3-4 weeks ago, our federal government enacted some new policies that are going to be coming down the pipeline around sugar and salt that are going to address this issue even farther than what Janet and I Janet is talking about today. So there's going to be more to come on this topic that's going to be forced down the road to us. in the next 2-3 fiscal years.
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Ms. Moore.
Yes, so this is U.S. code, correct? This is under the U.S. federal guidelines. And I noticed on here, it's also Minnesota statute. Is that also coming from the Minnesota statute then, or is that, because at the end is the legal references, I see USC, which is probably code, U.S. code, and also Minnesota statute. So it's also coming down from Minnesota then, correct?
Yeah, the snack piece is definitely part of the USDA federal
Okay,
guidelines. That's part of the federal meals.
Okay, thank
I think the Minnesota statute piece is more around the physical activity,
Oh, all right.
whereas the USDA stuff, the federal stuff, is around snacks.
The policy is what the policy is. It's unfortunate because so many things that kids used to do and celebrate and families used to do appear to be gone. And I'll just be quiet.
I would agree with Mr. Wolf's commentary. I guess from my perspective, it's how is it being enforced now?
I think the short answer is it's not.
Okay, how? And I'm again walking the fine line of setting policy and enforcing policy, but how do you propose it would be? So if I send my kindergartner with 24 cupcakes, I purchase the cupcakes.
Mm-hmm.
I obviously understand that that is not a smart snack choice. But if I am following the smart snack standards and provide a healthy snack option for my kiddo to bring and celebrate themselves, are you going to send the bag of apples back?
So the discussion that we had with two of the elementary principals, which is where this is most likely to be occurring, it's less common at the middle and high school level. It happens, but it's less common, was that it would need to be clearly communicated at the start of the school year, right? This isn't something we would hope to enforce the last week of school. This would be a clearly communicating with families ahead of the school year, making it very clear in all of the family communication that this has been our policy, and if we choose to say no snacks at all, then if that's enacted as our policy, then that's new. That would be the policy, and then yes, the expectation would be that we're sorry, we can't accept snacks, and they would be sent back. The idea is, once you do something like that, if it's consistently enforced, then people understand that that's the rule, and it doesn't become an issue for very long. It's if it's inconsistently enforced, then it will likely continue to be an issue that has to be addressed.
Ms. Woodrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So is there a potential, what happens if we don't abide by this? What is the consequence for us? We say, we don't like this. We want our kids to be able to have some healthy snacks brought in, because that's an option, but it sounds like under this plan, it's not an option. If you go to some of the cafeterias in the schools and you see everyone has to take a fruit or a vegetable, and they take one, they can just put it back in the basket when they leave the cafeteria, because obviously, and they don't like milk, they have to take milk. If they don't like it, then we dump it out. Goes into a bucket. We can try to force a lot of things on our kids, but if they don't want to eat it, or I guess what I'm asking is there no flexibility here without some kind of a penalty for us in our school district to bring in some healthy snacks? Can't we just say what the snacks are that are healthy and then have parents follow that guideline?
So back to the earlier comment, we can do that if we decide to change what's in this written proposed policy. We can do that, but then what you're doing is putting in place an expectation that either a classroom teacher or a building administrator or some other staff is going to be expected to ensure that, in fact, anything that's brought in meets those standards. So then that's time that they're spending doing that instead of all of the other myriad of expectations we have of the staff in the district.
Well, excuse me, but Mr. Chairman, I am hearing from teachers who are willing to do that. I haven't heard from others who aren't willing to do it, so I'm still unsure what the consensus is with teachers, and especially it's coming from those in the younger grades, kindergarten, first grade. So I'm just not sure where this is going, if they're going to add more restrictions. Do we currently, can we have chocolate milk? And so is that going to be removed? I'm looking at the federal website here. Flavored milk seems to be, maybe it's different than chocolate milk. I don't know.
So-
There's a whole list of things. I'm not sure how it's going to be applied. I haven't had time to read that.
So I can speak to the milk. I think that's probably a little bit off topic of what we're here for, but the milk that we serve today can be chocolate milk. And that will continue into the future under the new guidelines that were passed, like I said, about a month ago.
Okay.
The milk products that we will have in the next couple of years will have less sugar or less lactose in them. And so there'll be a complete different type of milk. For those of you that are familiar with Fairlife milk, there's new milk on the product. It'll be something along those lines, that it will be still be chocolate milk, but will not have as much sugar in that milk as the current chocolate milk that we have today. So that is not going away.
Okay. I see that beans, peas, and lentils are going to be offered instead of some meats. So right now, I'm wondering how kids get through their day with what they eat. It's just from volunteering in the lunchroom, some kids eat very little of anything. And some things they really like are hamburgers. They love those. There's others too, but I mean, when you work in the lunchroom or volunteer, you kind of get an understanding of what they like and what they don't like. And we can try to change their minds, but I just wonder about messing with all this food and
Well, I respectfully, I hear what you're saying. I think what we're saying is that the federal government has told us that these are the guidelines, and in order to participate in the federal meal program, we have to meet those guidelines. So that's not really one that we get to have a whole lot of say in. The piece of this policy where we do get to have some say is whether we're going to say yes, families can bring snacks in or not. If we say yes, then we must abide by the federal guidelines, which is every snack that's brought in has to meet the smart snack standards, which means somebody has to be determining whether or not the snacks meet those standards. So that's.
Mr. Chair.
well, I for one would like to allow that option.
And in my world, we also must be then prepared that, heaven forbid, a student, a child who has a food allergy, who does have that, has a reaction, and we also had to be prepared for that as well. This is about students, someone bringing in snacks. Parents can still send their child a snack of their own choice.
Yes.
So that's my world here, and I just want to, that was what I wanted to bring up for discussion on the particular first reading. Ms. Moore, did you have anything else?
Yes, I just have a question. How many years have we had federal guidelines on nutrition set forth? For a long time? So we haven't been enforcing them, so.
Well, no, I wouldn't say we haven't been, they change periodically. So
Have they been this stringent, I guess?
no, they continue to get more and more stringent.
I know, I'm just going to say, my granddaughters, they're in a different district, but they bring their lunch now because they don't like the school food. Now, that's in a different district, but we have to think about that too, so.
Are there any other questions regarding any of the policies for the first reading? With that, then, we'll move to 8C. The following policies are presented for approval. Before I take a motion for approval, I've been asked by Ms. Moore to pull number 11, policy number 413A, and number 15, policy 510, which is school activities. 413A is harassment and violence, parent and coaches policy, and policy 510 is school activities. So those two will be off the table. Other than that, does anyone else have any they would like pulled for further discussion? If not, I'll entertain a motion to accept the policies as listed, except policy 413A and policy 510. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'll move for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Do I have a second?
Second?
Thank you, Ms. Moore, for the second. Discussion on any of the policies. Policy 409, employee publications, instructional materials, inventions and creations. Policy 421, gift to employees and school board members. Policy 430, transitional return to work. Policy 431, teacher code of ethics. Policy 511, student fundraising. Policy 512, school-sponsored student publications and activities. And Policy 518, DNR, DNI orders. Any discussion? Discussion. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. Next then, I'll entertain a motion for approval of Policy 413A, harassment and violence, parent and coaches policy. Also move approval of that policy. Do I have a second?
Second?
Thank you, Ms. Steves. And discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I would like to add the amendment in policy 413A, Roman numeral 3, parents B. And I'd like to add, I will say what I'd like to add in a second here. But parents are expected to follow rules set forth by the Minnesota State High School League, including the Code of Ethics. And I'd like to add, comma, as long as these rules do not violate parents' religious beliefs. That's my amendment.
Thank you. I'm trying to, let's see. So that's under Part B,
Yes, 3.
3B. Okay, there you go.
3B.
Thank you. I was in the wrong
Oh,
column.
sorry,
Thank
you're
you.
in the wrong policy.
3B, and you
Yes.
wish to add, after Code of Ethics, your amendment of, as long as these rules do not violate parents' religious beliefs. So you have that motion for that amendment, correct?
Yes.
Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second just because I have a discussion that I'd like to, or have a question.
We have a second. Okay, discussion.
Ms. Moore,
Yes.
can you put in relevant terms what following the State High School League rules and including Code of Ethics for parents means with your amendment in there? I mean, what does that give the right of
And
a
actually,
parent to do?
this would go for 510 too, because I think 413A is concerning parents and 510 is concerning students.
We're just going to talk about 413A.
Yes, but I mean, this would include that too. I think it's the mission of the Faribault Public Schools to treat everyone equitably. However, by not adding this amendment, parents, and I'm going to say students because it's 510, will be forced to choose between their religious beliefs and participating in sports. Further, this is unconstitutional and coming against the religious rights of a certain group of parents. And I'm going to say students for 510, just for the time's sake. Additionally, I believe this is a form of hypocrisy within our school system and a subtle form of discrimination against certain religious groups within our schools. We may do, we do have recourse, they do have recourse, parents, I think, and students, but this would take time and energy and time and energy is something that parents don't readily have in abundance. I would just like to say, to reiterate, that this is not equitable, it's not, nor is it inclusive, and it's discriminatory, and that's my reasoning.
And I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, as you know, I coach basketball.
Yes, I know.
I'm trying to understand. Parents are expected to follow rules set forth by the Minnesota State High School League, including Code of Ethics.
Mhm.
Then you discuss religious beliefs. I'm trying to make a real life understanding for me as a coach. What religious beliefs are not being
this-
followed by parents,
This,
where we're penalizing potentially. I don't
this is
understand.
going back to Minnesota State High School League, all that we went through last year, where if a student that identifies, it's a male student identifying as a female student can
So
go into the
transgender.
showers. Yes.
Okay,
And so this, in essence, I do believe, and this is my belief, that this is discriminating against certain students do not believe in the gender ideology, and certain parents don't. So that is where I'm coming from.
Just have, sorry.
Go ahead.
Mr. Wolf.
Ms. Steves.
The local Catholic high school has signed the agreement for the Minnesota State High School League without similar amendments, assuming.
Well, this is for one of our own policies. This doesn't have anything to do with the Minnesota State High School League resolution at this point.
Yes, there may be confusing. This is just our policy. And I think we do have say over a policy. We don't have say over the Minnesota State High School League, but I think this may be causing some problems with parents.
Let's keep the conversation to
Parents.
the motion of
Yes, okay.
the
And
amendment.
that's my stand.
no, and I appreciate it, so I'm gonna come back, and I'm not arguing with you, I'm trying to better understand, because if there's a potential for me to support it, I need to understand it. Is that fair? So I'm trying to understand real-life example of how the State High School League, the rules that are set by the State High School League and the Code of Ethics, if there is something, as you mentioned, regarding transgender, parents have every right to voice their concerns or pull their child out or come and say whatever they want here. So I guess I'm still trying to understand
Well-
what religious beliefs we're potentially violating.
It's the fact that if I were a parent and and I had a female student.
Yeah.
And there was a boy, transgender that comes into like Riley Gaines.
Yeah.
I would have a big problem with that, and I think because it does go against my religious beliefs, and and the fact that I would have to even address something like this would be offensive to me. So that's where I'm
Gotcha.
coming from.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Further discussion on the amendment? Further discussion on the amendment? If not, we will vote. A yes vote is in favor of the amendment to add, as long as these rules do not violate parents' religious beliefs. A no vote, you are not in favor of the amendment. All in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Nay.
Or no, nay, whatever you want me to say.
Motion fails, 3-2. We are now back to our original motion of approval of policy 413A, harassment and violence. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Any further discussion? Further discussion. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Motion passes 4-1. We'll now go to policy 510. I'll entertain a motion for approval of policy 510, school activities.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Do I have a second? Thank you, Ms. Steves. Discussion.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Moore.
It's the same thing, only for students. Those students who participate in Minnesota State High School League MSHSL activities must also abide by the league rules. And I'd like to add, comma, as long as these rules do not violate students' religious beliefs.
Okay, so you're adding, this is in policy 510,
Yes, I'm
item
sorry,
3,
yes.
responsibility, letter D.
Right.
And then after rules, comma, as long as these rules do not violate a student's religious beliefs. So we have a motion to amend as presented there. Do we have a second? We have a second to amend. Last call for second to amend. Hearing no second, the motion dies for no second. We are back to approval of policy 510, school activities. Discussion. Any discussion? Any discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion passes 4-1. Next, we'll move on to agenda item 8D. Consider approval of rescission of policy 410.1 FMLA leave expansion and leave policy coronavirus extension to June 30th, 2021. Do we have a motion to rescind policy 410?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Do we have a second?
Second?
Thank you, Ms. Steves. Discussion? Any discussion? Discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item number 9, other committees. Finance Committee report. Once again, board members and members of the public, I'm going to report on the May 13th Finance Committee, even though, and on board book, it does have our fiscal year 24 monthly student counts for April, the investment report April, and the comparative financial, et cetera. The Finance Committee, basically, we met on Monday, May 13th, and we approved to purchase Apple products for fiscal year 25. These things are coming up, I believe, here. We also approved for fiscal year 24-25 Nursestrand contracts, the Nursestrand nurse contracts, the Nursestrand maintenance contract, the Nursestrand information technology contract, Nursestrand lease contract, and the Nursestrand food service contract. We also approved the SFM workers' compensation policy, and we also approved the third-party billing contract. We approved also unanimously the the LTFM 10-year plan, as well as the Finance Committee approved the request for 2 additional FTE EL teachers for fiscal year 24-25. As far as financial performance, our April student counts, April student counts, we are down by 19 students, and I believe that was 15 the month before. Our self-insurance policy fund is now positive, showing $85,000 revenue over expenses at the end of April. Our April investment report is our cash and investments have increased by just under $1 million up from April. And they were expected in the upward trend in cash receipts for February, March, April, and May. Our April analytics, looking at local revenue, this large increase was due to the debt we took on for the sales of bonds. State revenue is still up and federal revenue is down again, mainly due to lack of ESSER funding. And our fund balance will see an increase at the end of fiscal year 24, and that will be short-lived as expected to drop in fiscal year 25. So any questions or additions, Mr. Wolf or Ms. Boudreau, for that
No, well
Finance
said.
Committee report?
No questions, Mr. Chair?
Okay, thank you. Or any other board member have any questions on that? Oh, okay. Other matters, we'll move down to gifts and donations, Resolution 2431. Let me get this. Resolution 2421 for gifts and donations. I will entertain a motion when I'm done reading this lengthy list here for approving the acceptance of the following gifts and donations. Faribault Transportation Service donated $500 to Jefferson for the playground. Elks Club number 1166 donated $500 to Jefferson for the playground. Faribault Booster Club made the following donations: $5,000 to Faribault High School for the annual software maintenance fee for scoreboards in the Nolan Gym. $15,000 to Faribault High School for the outdoor scoreboards at Bruce Smith Field, Ted Nelson Track, $2,187.96 to Faribault High School for new TVs in the Felix Fitness Center. The following donations were made to DECA: True View via Faribault Booster Club, $1,000. Faribault Transportation, $100. Andreas Agency LLC, $100. Barb Brinkman, $100. Faribault Country Club, $20. Side by Side, $200. Harry Brown's Family Automotive, $500. Reliance Bank, $100. Erickson Furniture, $25. Faribault Interiors, $100. LeCans Marine, $200. Monkey Motors, $100. Parker Cole Funeral Home, $50. Bolt Funeral Home, $150. Chappie Jewelry, $100. Faribault Distinguished Alumni Committee, $200. Jason Rare LLC, $350. State Farm Jason Crone Insurance Agency Incorporated, $50. DS Flooring Service, $60. North Star Trading, $100. The Faribault Lions Club donated $950 to the Nest for student vision needs. Culligan of Faribault donated 6 cases of bottled water for the 5th grade track and field day on May 8th, 2024. And Anna Zavarilli with Healthy Impact donated 12 Pink Flamingo tea drinks, approximately value $60, for National Nurses Day Health Services Team Appreciation. The Faribault Area Chamber donated $400 to Jefferson and Lincoln for 3rd grade ag in the classroom, a farm field trip. That is our list of gifts and donations. Under Resolution 2431, I'll entertain a motion for approval of Resolution 2431.
I'll move for approval, Mr.
Thank you,
Chair.
Mr. Wolf. Do we have a second? Thank you, Ms. Steves. Any discussion?
Mr. Chair, I didn't hear them all. Could you repeat them? Just a big thank you to the community and all the people. There's a long 2 pages of people and businesses and whatnot, so thank you.
Yeah, echo Mr. Wolf's sentiment. I've said it over and over again. We have an incredibly generous community. Thank you on behalf of our students.
Mr. Chair, I
Ms.
echo to what both of you said. When you were reading that, I had read it before, but it's like, wow, there's a lot of donations. So we should be very thankful.
It is impressive, and again, we thank everyone in our community for their donations, whatever. It just shows the commitment that our community has for our schools. With that, all in favor of Resolution 24-31 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I think
Is
it's
this
a
a-
roll call.
Oh,
Roll
roll
call.
call, there I go. I read too much, I guess. Roll call, Ms. Steves, thank you, Mr. Wolf.
Linda Boudreau.
Aye.
Linda Moore.
Aye.
Cassie Steves, aye. Chad Wolf.
Aye.
John Bellingham.
Aye.
Passes.
Passes 5-0. Thank you. Next, we have Resolution 24-32, and it's a donation from the Robichaux family, and I would ask you to come up to the front at this time. Ginny, you can come up too. Okay. So if you'd be so kind to, I need to do a couple homework things here before I do this. So Resolution 24-32 is that the Robichaux family has donated $3,000 for behavioral health services. So I'm going to entertain a motion for approval of Resolution 24-32.
So moved.
Thank you, and I will second that. And for discussion, I'm going to turn over, so if you would introduce yourself and just give a brief
Sure.
writing with that.
Sure. My name is Jennifer Robichaux, representing the Robichaux family. 2 years ago, well, in 2021, we lost my brother Christian to suicide. And we wanted to find a way to keep his memory alive. And so we the last couple of years have hosted a golf tournament in his honor, and the proceeds or the money raised No proceeds. The money raised from that goes to 3 different things that were important to him. First of all, we give to the National Park Foundation. He was an avid outdoorsman and enjoyed being outside, and so we donate to that every year. And we also have a scholarship through the school, the Christian Robichaux Scholarship Fund, that we donate to every year. And we hope to keep that going for years to come in his honor. And then we felt it very important knowing we need to encourage positive mental health in our community, and we wanted to touch directly the school system here. So we have given to both Faribault Public Schools and BA earmarked to help any students in need, whether it be counseling, helping your counselors, whatever it may be. And we hope that going forward we can continue to do this year after year because we realize the importance of it. So, thank you.
Thank you. Discussion. Ms. Moore?
Yes, I think that this is very generous on the part of Dr. Robichaux and the family, and I want to thank him and all of you. Could I learn a little bit more about the specifics of what this is going for?
Well,
counseling, you said, and
we have just given it to the schools, a donation earmarked for any behavioral mental health. I mean, we could do it. We've kind of left it to the counselors because we don't know specifically like who needs it and who doesn't. So we, if they need, if we could pay for a year of counseling for someone, if they know that they would need that maybe if a family can't afford it, or your counselors maybe need some resources that they could utilize that money for. We're kind of leaving it up to, the
so
school.
it's the counselors are going to decide
Yeah.
then. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Any further discussion?
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Welcome.
Thank you for coming. I know
Thank you.
it's
Thank you.
difficult, and what a great honor and that you and your family have done, and it's very hard.
Thank you very
hard to
much.
think like that. So, Ms. Steves, if you would do a roll call, please.
Linda Boudreau,
Aye.
Linda Moore,
Aye.
Cassie Steves, aye. John Chadwell,
Aye.
John Bellingham.
Aye.
Passes 5-0.
Thank you. And thank you so much once again. Appreciate
Thank you.
it. Move on to 10C, the Wellness Policy and Triennial Assessment. It's a report. Mr. Gertis and Ms. Lewis Smith, back up front.
We're back. So what we really want to do is spend a little bit of time giving you an update on the Wellness Committee, the work of the Wellness Committee, which does involve, a small portion of it has been the policy work, but there's a lot more to it than just the policy. So we'll just jump right in. One of the things that I think is important to know about the Wellness Committee this year is that it has really been driven by a grant opportunity that we received. Am I in charge of? Yeah, look at that. Okay. Sorry, I'm caught up now. It's really been driven by a grant opportunity that we received from the Minnesota Department of Education. They received a grant from the Federal Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, known as the School-Based Interventions to Promote Equity and Improve Health, Academic Achievement, and Well-Being of Students. As a part of that grant from the CDC, they were expected to identify a single priority district in the state of Minnesota. So Minnesota was one of 20 states and tribal nations that were selected for this prestigious grant. And then the state of Minnesota, MDE, chose Faribault as the single priority district to be a part of this whole project. So that has really been driving the work of the Wellness Committee this year. It brings specific resources and expertise from the CDC right into our district here in Faribault, and a few of you were involved in a site visit a couple weeks ago, or just last week. I don't remember, how time goes fast. But that's a really exciting moment for us. The focus on this grant is really about physical activity, nutrition, and then support for students with chronic conditions. So that's what the CDC is hoping to see improvements in across the 20 states and tribal nations that were awarded the grant. It specifically utilizes the whole school, whole community, whole child model, often referred to as WISC, and it provides support for district-wide and individual building level work. So the two main areas of work that we have concentrated on this year were goal setting and action plans, and then really doing the policy update, which we were just discussing a little bit earlier. So in terms of the goal setting and action plans, each of our schools completed what's known as the School Health Index. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Then we utilized the results from that to establish some district-wide goals. Each building also established their own goals and have started to put together both short and long-term action plans to achieve some of those goals. And then along with the policy review, this is the year that we needed to complete our triennial assessment and start to have some plans for how we actually get ourselves in compliance with our policy. So the School Health Index that I was just referencing is, again, based on this whole, we'll just call it the WISC model. So there are 10 elements in the WISC model. Those are in that blue circle on the outside. And then the 11th module in the index actually includes an assessment of where we're at with our policy and how well we're doing with our policy. So in the fall, each building completed all 11 modules of the School Health Index. Then the Minnesota Department of Education compiled those results for us and brought them back to us. And at one of our quarterly meetings, we had a group activity to look at all of the results district-wide, and we used that information to determine what we wanted our district-level goals and focus to be. And then each building was able to sit down individually with their specific building results and start building their own action plans. So the district goals that we landed on, the first one is to increase family engagement opportunities in all buildings and across the district. So that's something that we started working on some this year and are going to continue working on into next year. The second goal is to increase community involvement in health and wellness activities, and so just making sure that we've got not just families involved, but the whole community, right? And I think looking at the list of donations that this district receives, that's a great example. There's already wonderful community involvement. We just want to make sure that some of that community involvement is related to health and wellness activities. And then the third goal is making sure that as a district we're providing adequate resources to support employee wellness. So we aren't necessarily getting into micromanaging what each of the buildings will be doing for employee wellness, but rather to say at the district level, how are we supporting that we actually have adequate resources? So making sure that we have appropriate, private, comfortable breastfeeding spaces is one example, and we're partnering with Rice County Public Health. They have a state health improvement program that has funds that's making it possible for our buildings to update the spaces to make sure that they are comfortable and private and safe, and in a way that we would not necessarily as a district have had the resources to do solo, but by partnering we're able to do that. So that's just one example. So then each of the buildings have established goals and action plans as well. They started off with kind of a short-term goal for this year, and then at our last meeting just earlier last week, they started establishing action plans for the upcoming school year. So they were each allowed to identify their area of focus based on their School Health Index results, and most of our buildings identified employee wellness as a really important area of focus, and so we're excited to see that and ready to support it. But the buildings also identified other areas, and there was at least one building that did not identify employee wellness, and so here's some examples of the kinds of things that other buildings did identify. So increasing student access to fresh fruit, increasing access to health services, and then increasing community involvement in their school activities. You're up, Mr. Gertis.
So part of this that we talked about, and Janet just mentioned a little bit ago, was completing the triennial assessment. And I'll mention a little bit about what that is for the newer board members here. The triennial assessment is a requirement that all schools need to do in order to be part of the school nutrition program, or the National School Lunch Program, National School Breakfast Program. And now in the state of Minnesota, the Minnesota All Kids Eat Free program as well, because they're all intermixed together. And so what that is, it's an assessment that we, as a subcommittee, completed. And the subcommittee was Janet, myself, some site administrators, site teachers, Sodexo, our food service company, and Rice County Department of Health. And so the assessment is right here. It's called the WellSat 3.0. There's 78, I think, different questions in this to really address how our policy compares to a national policy that has all the moving parts and everything that it should have. And so one of the things that, again, we met 3 times, and we went through the assessment, and I'm going to have Janet flip the page here.
Go one more. That's the
Oh,
explaining the baseline data.
I wanted to show the data. Yep, right there. Sorry. We didn't practice beforehand. So again, so this is the breakdown. There's the 6 sections there, and you can see how our baseline data fared compared to a perfect score of 100. And so we have 2 sets of data. We have the comprehensive data. And the comprehensive data is, do we mention it? Do we talk about it? Is it included in our policy? And so that's one set of scores. You see that in the first column there. So you're looking at the first one, nutrition education, we scored 62. Well, that's not terribly bad, right? That's a D, right, in most grading systems, right? But then we look at the strength score. Strength score is, how are we doing? Are we doing a good job at this? Are we doing a bad job at this? And we scored there as a group, right, the 7 of us or 8 of us that were in this group, a 12 and a half. So as you look down those numbers there, not very good in the strength area, right? And what that tells us at the end of the day is that we have a long way to go in all 6 of these categories in order to make progress. I want to address, one of the questions that Linda Boudreau had earlier about, what does the state do? So the state requires us to do this assessment, complete this assessment, and every 3 to 4 years we get reviewed from Department of Education to see how we're doing in our food service as well as our triennial assessment. Since I have been here, I've not been part of a food service audit for the National School Lunch Program. We're on point to have one next year in fiscal year 25. So that will be my first one here in Faribault. But one of the things that they're going to look at is the work that Janet has done with the wellness policy, the subcommittee in terms of the triennial assessment and all the work we did there. And again, all the changes that you guys all have that are redlined in the policy that you have in front of you today. So, is that the last slide? Yeah, okay. So, yeah, I'll let you.
So one final piece of the triennial assessment is that our wellness, we have to have a functioning wellness committee. And each year we need to establish some wellness goals. They don't have to be policy-related goals, just goals related to wellness. And so in addition to the district level goals that are being driven by that grant, we also wanted to have goals that we felt like were not necessarily tied to the grant, but are just about what we want to do. And so this was, again, the subcommittee that was looking at policy that established these goals, doing this triennial assessment. And the first one was really, we felt like it was important for us to establish compliance with our existing policy on food for celebrations and fundraisers. That it's important for us to get in compliance with the policy that we already have on the books, regardless of what the decision is made for the updated policy. The second piece that we felt like was important for us to at least explore is the guidelines for competitive foods being in alignment with the American Academy or American Association of Pediatrics, that they actually have some guidelines related to caffeine. So one of the members of our committee is also a parent and expressed some pretty significant concerns about the amount of caffeine that can in fact be purchased right now that meet Smart Snack guidelines. So there aren't caffeine guidelines in the Smart Snack standards that come from USDA, but there's a fair amount of evidence that a whole lot of caffeine consumption in the younger years is not great for physical health. And so we decided that one of our goals is to at least explore what those guidelines are and what that would mean for us. So no specific action saying that we have to be in alignment with that, but we want to explore it. And then the third one is really thinking about how do we increase physical activity instruction minutes at all levels. Our policy doesn't actually say specific minutes. Model policies do, like how many minutes are expected at each different grade level. We don't specify that in our policy right now, and many of the model policies do that. And so we thought it was worth exploring that and figuring out what we think is appropriate for us. So again, none of that is reflected in the current policy update that you have in front of you. These are just goals for the coming year for us to start exploring. Oh.
Mr. Chair? Oh, I'm sorry.
One more thing, sorry, Linda, before
No,
you
that's okay.
ask questions. One of the things too, again, back to the triennial assessment is these goals were going to be measured, right, over time. So in 3 more years, when we do this assessment again, we'll want to see how did we do with these goals and are we making some headway? And do we have new goals? Did we accomplish these goals and now we've moved on to another set of goals? And that's what Janet and the Wellness Committee will be doing too over the next period of time.
Very good. Thank you. Board members, questions?
Yes, Mr.
Ms.
Chair.
Moore?
Yes, from my understanding, there's 11 goals, correct? Or, 11, not right now, but overall, there's 11 goals, right? Or 11 standards, from what I was seeing.
If you mean 11 modules in the school
Modules,
health
that's what I meant,
index, yes.
sorry. Yes.
Yes.
Now, we're only working on the first two then, right? With nutrition and, was it the first two? So we're going to take each of these a little bit every year, because obviously to try to get 11 modules going is going to be difficult, right?
Yeah. Well, so
And
there's a couple of different ways to answer that question. The first is that the grant from MDE is specifically focusing on physical activity, nutrition, and then ensuring support for students who have chronic conditions. So
Okay,
a student with
that's what
asthma,
that's-
for example, those are the specific focus areas of the CDC grant. But because the CDC utilizes the WISC model, which has
Mm-hmm.
all of there are 10 areas that are in that blue. So if I go back.
Yes, I know I downloaded and looked at it, but
Yep.
that's been a while ago.
So those are the 10 areas, and those, along with policy, were the 11 modules that are built into the school health index. So we did, each school building analyze themselves
Yes,
against those
Right,
criteria,
right.
and then they are identifying their focus areas for the building. So
Mm-hmm.
those focus areas are coming from all 11
From
of
there,
these. They don't
yes.
have to stick with physical activity or nutrition.
okay.
So did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Further questions?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Gertis and Ms. Lewis-Muth, thank you for doing this and presenting. In the little, I don't know, matrix that's baseline data, if you will, I just have to point out one, and I've been on this board for 10 years, and I'm a big believer that when we have kind of 50-50 things in the air, we should always do what's right for students. If I'm reading this right, physical education, physical activity, 4.47%. I don't even know how to measure that. It's so low. I mean, like, I don't know what that relates to other than horrific, horrible, non-existent. I don't know what that means in this, right, in terms of our district or whatever. I think it would be wonderful if we can figure out a way to have our kids have Phy-Ed every single day at the young levels. And I don't know if that's possible, because I get it. If you do that, then you're taking time away from reading and math and every other thing under the sun. But here we sit up here and we're talking about what snacks we can bring into a classroom, and we can't. And, we get more rules every year. And I'm not going on a tirade here that I'm a conspiracy theorist or an anti-regulation. But what does 4.47% mean to our district as we read this, or the community reads this, in terms of physical education, physical activity? How do you frame that?
Yep. So the tool that we utilized for this, to be fair, as with all tools, it's not perfect, right? But the tool that we utilized for this, in this particular module, we're looking at physical education and physical activity. There are specific things that they believe should be a part of a policy. So again, this is related to how well our policy addresses physical education and physical activity. So I want to be careful that we don't overinterpret this to mean that, like, when kids are in PE class, they're only getting 4% good education. That's not true, right? So I just want to be clear. But what it talks about is things like, in our policy, does it address the time per week of physical education instruction for middle school students? And the answer to that is no. Our policy does not specify how much time every middle school student is expected to have physical education. And so we had to give ourselves a 0 on that, right? We don't.
Simply
it's not-
because our policy doesn't state it.
Yep, and that's
So-
what this tool that we utilized for this process is really just about evaluating our policy. And so that's why in our goals that we established, we said we want to explore what physical activity minutes should be. Is that, like, do we want to get to the place where we're saying in our policy this many minutes at each of these grade levels is what we want? Or we're going to say we don't need that level of regulation. We're comfortable with what we have it's not in our policy, but we're comfortable with what we have as a program. We have to do that work because we haven't. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
sorry. I did not know that the strength, when I read what strength means up above, I read strength score measures how well we are doing in an area. I don't see that it says how well we're doing with regards to wording in a policy.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
my apologies. I still think we should have more FIAD at elementary school level, so. But thank you for that clarification.
Absolutely.
As Mr. Benty pointed out earlier, so do the students. They want recess.
They persuaded me.
Exactly,
You know.
right. So, any
Thank you.
further questions or discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I just have a question, and thank you for presenting this information and the previous information. I know you're doing good work getting it ready for us to see. But one of the goals and action plans was increasing community involvement in school activities.
Mhm.
You know, usually when we have community involvement, we have food. So how does the other restrictions, do they still apply to when we do community events? Do we have any flexibility with some of this, the challenges we have with food?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
food is something that brings us together.
Yep, that's a great question, and yes, there is some flexibility. So the guidelines as they are established by USDA define the school day as being from, so our school day today would have been midnight last night until 30 minutes after the bell rings. So at the high school, the bell rings at 3:05. The school day would end at 3:35. Okay, so then after 3:35, we're no longer in the school day, and so the same regulations don't apply until we hit midnight. And then at midnight, the clock starts over again for the next day. So for example, concessions being sold at a basketball game, right? There aren't the same restrictions on concessions, but if we're selling food during the school day, right, that's competing with our food service program, that's where the restrictions come in.
Okay,
And it's part of the reason that they're labeled competitive foods, right? Even snacks brought into a classroom are considered competitive foods because they're competing with students eating their school's supplied lunch.
that's a
food
good thing.
nutrition.
Thank you. And
So-
Mr. Chairman, then I have a question about health services. I'm just reading parts of the slide here.
Yep.
Access to health services. What kind of health services will we be offering? And is this something we have to take the child to? Or is it something their parents will take them to?
So in that particular one, the building that had named that as a goal is a building that did not at the time have a school nurse in their building. And so their students didn't have access to any kind of on-site health services. So you think about a student who is managing asthma on a daily basis, they don't have a nurse who's there to help them if they happen to have an asthma attack and they need a space to be with somebody who can monitor them and make sure that their rescue inhaler is working effectively, for example. So that's what that one was in reference to.
I was looking at some of the broader information on the whole child. And do we offer dental services through this?
So not specifically through this,
Okay.
we do, through the community school and our agreement with our community partners, there are free dental clinics that are made available on site. So information is sent home, parents can sign up their children to receive free dental care on site at the school. So it makes it easier for parents who can't take the time or don't have access to dental services, that their children can receive those services right on site.
And a big component of the services was the partnerships with other groups. That's what I read anyway.
Yep.
And it sounds like you're affirming that we have partnerships with other groups, other entities that help to provide the services that our students may need
Yes.
regarding their health.
Yep, so in this example, that would be the Health Finders is the
Okay.
entity that provides the dental
Got it.
care. Yep.
Thank you.
Very good. Anything else?
As a part of the wellness committee, I have really appreciated the involvement of this group. The things, and I'm with Mr. Wolf on the baseline data. It's a little confusing to read, but it's being in that meeting where, teachers and principals and staff were putting what their honest to goodness thoughts were on where we rate and what their priorities as far as wellness, and seeing it come. And then reflecting it in a policy, yes, I know that I have some misgivings as a parent about snacks in classrooms. But it's rewarding to see that there's more involvement at the ground level, if you will, not just a top-down approach. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Very good. Yes, thank you so much. Excellent presentation and clarification, so appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Gertis, you might as well stay right there. You're up, or if you need your computer. Okay, very good. So we're on to agenda item number 10D, the Food Service Fund Balance Update, a report by Mr. Gertis.
Yes, I did have the right pile of paper. So just wanted to bring a quick update to the board around our food service fund balance. So several of you remember me talking on multiple occasions that our fund balance is higher than what it should be based on the USDA guidelines that were revised over COVID. And so just to give you just a little background, prior to COVID, we were not allowed to have more than 3 months of operating expenses on hand at the end of the year or in your fund balance. And then during COVID, they increased that 3 months to 6 months. And they've extended that 6 months now into fiscal year 25. Currently today, we are over 10 months of cash on hand. So we received a letter from MDE that says, hey, you know, you got to do something, right, to spend that down. But everything that we tried to do, we met resistance. Well, you can't do this, and you can't do that, and sorry, but this doesn't work, and so on and so forth. So about 3, 4, 5 weeks ago now, I was able to actually have an on-site meeting with the assistant director of the food service department with the Department of Ed, and it was a very productive meeting. So I'm here to share with you that we were able to come to a lot of consensus over doing some makeup air units that was denied last year, that they are now going to allow, do some flooring upgrades at Jefferson Elementary School. As some of you are aware, we have some upgrades that are going to happen sometime, hopefully at the McKinley site. In their kitchen area, we were able to get some new yogurt machines at the middle school and high school, and while you might think that yogurt machines aren't that expensive, come to find out they're about $27,000 a crack. So it's significant dollars for the yogurt machines, which the kids really love, as long as we serve Smart Snack yogurt in those yogurt machines, right? So that actually was a requirement. I'm not joking. That is a real life fact. So anyway, just wanted to come and give the board an update there that while we probably will not still be in compliance at the end of fiscal year 25, 24, which is almost over, we are making some headway in spending down that fund balance. For those of you that are following the educational bill, there's a good chance I think we can buy cafeteria tables now under state statute, and so that is something we're looking to save some fund balance for as well, that we need to upgrade our cafeteria tables at least all 3 elementary schools and maybe a couple other sites as well. So those are some things that we're looking at to spend down those fund balances. So I just wanted to give a board an update to that, knowing that I've talked about that at financial meetings and sometimes expressed my frustration into not being able to do much, but we are making some headway with the state of Minnesota Department of Ed Food Service Division.
Mr. Gertis, what is our current fund balance in that food service account? And before any tables, what are you kind of just round number thinking you will be spending out of there on the flooring and makeup air units and things of that nature?
Makeup air units are going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $70,000 for both Jefferson at the high school. Those are the 2 that are in most dire need. The flooring that's going to happen end of May, first couple weeks in June is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $45,000. That's both for the flooring, and then obviously everything has to go. Everything's got to be unhooked, uninstalled, moved out of the kitchen, and then obviously put back into place. And we're going to try and get that done between the end of school and the start of summer steam. So it's a very, very tight window there. I mentioned earlier the cafeteria or the yogurt machines are somewhere in the neighborhood of $47,500 roughly for the two of them. Looking at some allocations for my time, by redefining my position a little bit as the Director of Student Nutrition Services, I can allocate some of my time and move around the state statute that disallows the Director of Finance to bill time or the Superintendent of Schools. Moving into next year, cafeteria tables are, good cafeteria tables are going to be a minimum of $2,500 a piece. So we're looking at probably $40,000, $50,000, just rough numbers off the top of my head for cafeteria tables. That will be a fiscal year 25 expense, though. That will not be on the books at the end of fiscal year 24. And then the kitchen work at McKinley is somewhere in that neighborhood of $400,000 to $500,000 to put that kitchen into place with all the new equipment and things there as well. So between all of that, I think we'll successfully spend down our fund balance and then some.
And what's our fund balance today, roughly?
Our fund balance at the end of 23 was, give me a second, I'll visualize it here in a little bit, but it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.6 million. We're probably about $200,000 up this year, so I'm guessing somewhere in that neighborhood of 1.8.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate it.
That's total fund balance, not the amount over the 6-month allowance.
Right, that's total food service fund balance.
Thank you, Chad, for clarifying, yes.
Thank you, appreciate the info.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Scott. I think we need all of those things done, and we've been waiting to get some approval to use the funding for that, and now you've finally gotten it. How long has it been that you've asked and waited?
Well, the makeup air units was early in fiscal year 23, so that's probably 15, 16 months. The flooring, that was earlier this year. Yogurt machine's been waiting earlier this year too. So the other thing I did not mention is we are doing some cooler upgrades as well. That was part of the overall plan. I didn't have to argue about that one. That one passed without too much argument. But that's about another $70,000, $80,000 we're sticking into the coolers and freezers in most of the schools.
Thanks for the update.
Yeah.
And it's really exciting that we're going to get some needed repairs done.
So if you see a negative in the food service now when I present the financials in September, October, now you know why, because that was the goal, is to be negative in that fund for fiscal year 24.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gertis. Appreciate it. Next, we have Mr. Birding, the Director of Technology and Innovation, as we are, item 10E is consider approval to purchase Apple products for fiscal year 25. Could I have a motion for approval to purchase Apple products for fiscal year 25?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. I'll second that. And discussion, and in our discussion, I'll turn it over to Mr. Birding.
Sure. Thank you for having me here tonight. And actually, I also want to take a moment to thank the middle school who were rock stars in getting me some survey data to move forward with the recommendation that I'll be making tonight. So I don't think I have control unless this is turned off. Okay. Hey, I got it now. There we go. So what I'm looking for today is to provide you some information on a device refresh for fiscal year 25. And that's going to contain middle school iPads, secondary staff, so middle school and high school MacBooks, and upgrade our screen beam technologies to Apple TVs. And so our current setup, our elementaries, they're already on MacBook Airs with Apple TVs. Our secondaries are on HP EliteBook 360s, and they use screen beams for their wireless projection. The lease for those HPs is done at the end of this fiscal year. And we do have some teachers that are currently piloting that they started, I believe, this year, piloting based on the previous technology director's support. So we do have a need for an update, most specifically with the screen beams. I use the word volatile. I would say volatile consistency is probably a very nice way to put that. It is, sometimes they work and a lot of times they don't. And I do hear that from teachers quite a bit. And then increased mobility. if we were to have a unified system, essentially, I would be able to go into any classroom with my equipment, be prepared to teach. So that's one of the areas I think I heard a lot about. So currently, the middle school are on the 8th gen iPads. They have a Griffin Survivor case, and we pay a third party per repair. So we have an update need for these. The 8th gen iPads are plagued with battery issues. Beyond any damages that they occurred, the batteries just stop working, and they're outside of warranty, so we can't do a whole lot with them other than pay to replace a battery, which is expensive. And as of creating this presentation, our third-party repairs, that includes the battery issues, but also screen damages and stuff that we believe is tied to two issues, one being the removal of the cases, and then the other being responsibility that we're working on. It's over $40,000 that we've paid in iPad repairs this year. So the case is not rugged. Also, the Griffin Survivor case, the screen protector over the top of it reduces the touch capacity of the device. So students are frequently taking it off because of that. A lot of times they put it back on when they're not using it, but a lot of times they don't, and they just will fall out of the case. So I'm asking today, and I pitched this to the Finance Committee, what was that, last week, for approval for secondary staff to have their devices, their current HPs, updated to MacBook Airs, and have the screen beams replaced with the Apple TVs, and then update the middle school iPads to the iPad 9th gen, but include a rugged Logitech Combo 3 keyboard case, and then including a 4-year Apple Care Plus that would cover 2 repairs per device per year at no additional charge beyond the $79 charge up front for the service. So to have a complete breakdown of the cost, the 200 MacBooks, about $175,800, 160 Apple TVs. The Apple TVs have already been purchased. We moved some money around this year from iPad sales to purchase the Apple TVs, and we purchased 40 of the MacBooks. So what we'd be looking at is a total cost of, or with the iPads too, $320,565. We'd be looking at a total cost of $520,205. We've already purchased $59,000 worth of equipment this fiscal year, and it's already here. And we anticipate, and this is a low estimate, $60,000 in surplus from sales of the iPads that we would be rotating out of the middle school. So I'm currently have budgeted for next year $401,205, and that's what I'm asking for an approval for today to purchase these Apple devices.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Board members, we do have a motion and a second for approval of to purchase the Apple products for fiscal year 25, and we have discussion or questions. Quiet on the technology piece, I guess. I think it's a great investment. I think that's what our kids need for a solid learning environment. I want to thank you for being proactive and getting out there and getting staff and kids what they're asking for and what they need. So appreciate that.
Mr. Bellingham, can I just ask Mr. Birding, and I know I asked you this in finance, but just for people watching, just for more of the community's sake, in the past we've been able to get some federal help around IT funding. Can you explain why this doesn't qualify for that?
Sure. So when COVID happened, the FCC distributed ECF funds, which were the electronic communication funds. So those ECF funds were an applied for mechanism that essentially they said, we'll give you money and you can use it to help support the learning from home essentially, because that's what a lot of schools ended up doing. So a number of years ago, we did utilize ECF funds here to purchase a large number of iPads, and that funding's dried up. So there is no eligible funding for that or any program of that nature for right now.
Perfect. No, thank you. I appreciate it.
Great question. Thank you. Anything else, board members? Any other questions? Discussion? Discussion? If not, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you so much. Move on to item 10F. Consider approval of fiscal year 24-25 Nurse Strand nurse contract. Mr. Gertis. So, board members, I believe the next 5 agenda items are approval of contracts with Nurse Strand, annual contracts that we have. So, 10F, I'll entertain a motion for approval of fiscal year 24-25 Nurse Strand nurse contract.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. And do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Steves. Discussion, I'll turn it over to Mr. Gertis.
Okay, so as Mr. Bellingham alluded to, we have 5 items before you today. All of them relate to the Near Strand Charter School in Near Strand, Minnesota. First one has to do with the nurses' contract. So every year, Near Strand buys some nursing time from our staff. It's not usually not very much, 15, 20 hours a year, to help with some of the needs that they have in that school. As some of you are, or all of you are probably aware, Near Strand's a very small school, roughly 90 students, and they don't have a lot of resources to do some of the specialty things like we do. So the first item today is to approve selling some time to Near Strand schools. How the contract works is we bill the actual hourly cost for the nurse or nurses that go over there and help out, and then we do charge them an 8% administrative fee on whatever that cost is.
Questions, discussion? Questions or discussion? Questions or discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. 10G, consider approval of fiscal year 24-25 Nurse Strand maintenance contract. Could I have a motion for approval of the fiscal year 24-25 Nurse Strand maintenance contract?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. Do I have a second? Thank you, Ms. Steves. Mr. Gertis.
So kind of the same thing as the nurses, since that building is owned by Faribault Public Schools, we employ the maintenance person over there that kind of abides by our ASHRA standards and our clean standards. Same contract type, it's cost-based contract plus an 8% administrative fee for that individual. And that amount changes every year based on the contract.
Thank you. Questions or discussion? Questions or discussion? Questions or discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. 10H, consider approval of fiscal year 24-25 Nurse Strand IT contract. Could I have a motion for approval of the fiscal year 24-25 Nurse Strand IT contract, please? Also move. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. Again, Mr. Gertis.
So kind of the same thing, third verse. Again, we do source out our IT staff to help with networking and workstation support for them. Again, that contract is billed out on a cost-based, whether that's for time or some software that we also provide for them. And again, there's the 8% administrative fee over the top of that.
Good. Questions, discussion? Questions or discussion? Questions or discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. 10I, consider approval of fiscal year 24-25 Nurse Strand lease contract. Could I entertain a motion for approval of the Nurse Strand lease contract?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Do I have a second? Thank you, Ms. Steves. Mr. Gertis.
So, a little bit different scenario here that we have here. So for those of you that aren't aware, charter schools cannot legally own the building that they house school in. It needs to either be owned by a third party or based under certain circumstances, it can be owned by a parent company of the charter school. The building today, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, is owned by Faribault Public Schools, and we charge a lease for them in the amount of $164,250 per year on an annual basis. It's kind of the way it's been for the last couple of years. For just point of reference, charter schools have a specific funding authority to levy for a rent factor that is based on, I believe it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,300 and some odd dollars per ADM that they have in a charter school, and then multiplied by 92%. I think it was changed this year. So that amount comes to about $20,000 short of what we actually charge them, but we've kind of set this as the base dollar amount for that rent every year. So,
Mr. Gertis, I have a question. So when they can, believe you said they can levy for the lease contract?
that is correct.
Does that come from the state, or does it come from, or the local taxpayers?
The local taxpayers.
Local taxpayer of the entire District 656?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or discussion?
Yeah, I have a question real quick.
Mr. Wolf?
Following Mr. Bellingham's question on the levy, Nurse Strand puts that levy out, or we do?
The state of Minnesota
state
does it on their behalf.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it has nothing to do, Chad, with the levy that we do in,
Right.
coming here in the next couple months.
Yeah, okay.
Nothing to do with that at all.
Thank you.
Further questions or discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. 10J, consider approval for fiscal year 24-25 Nurse Strand Food Service contract. Entertain a motion for the approval of the Nurse Strand Food Service contract for fiscal year 24-25.
So move.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. Do we have a second?
Second?
Thank you, Ms. Steves. Mr. Gertis.
So currently today, and what we're looking again to do in fiscal year 25 is we have a joint powers contract with Nearstrand. So what that means in layman's terms is that we run the entire food service operation at Nearstrand schools. Means we take care of all the equipment, we take care of serving the meal, we take care of all of the purchasing of food, or in our case, working with Sodexo as our food service management company. We take care of all their monitoring, billing, and everything else. So really what that means in the end of the day is we take all the revenue from that food service operation, and then we pay all the expenses associated with that operation. And we are in complete control of that site for food service.
Questions or discussion? Questions or discussion? Last call for questions or discussion. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. 10K, consider approval of SFM workers' compensation policy. Motion for approval of the SFM workers' compensation policy. Also move. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. And once again, Mr. Gertis.
So to give you a little background information, fiscal year 24, the current year that we're in today, we started with a new work comp carrier called SFM. They are a local Minnesota company, and they deal with roughly 100 different school districts in the state of Minnesota. last year at this time, as I was sitting here talking to you, we had an experience modification rate. And just for the new board members here, experience modification rate, or EMR for short, is a risk factor that all entities have, not just school districts, but all entities that are required to have work comp insurance, which is basically anybody with an employee, on the risk that you bring to the table of claims that would happen on your site. So the way the formula works is it looks at a bunch of different factors, but at the end of the day, one is kind of average, right? So I heard that put the other day, one is a C, right? When I started here about 4 years ago, our work comp modification was 1.62. So that means that for every dollar, right, the work comp company charges, we get charged with an extra 62% on top of that. So that's somewhere in the neighborhood of an F minus, right? Last year at this point in time, our experience modification rate was 1.17. So we're getting closer to that C range. And as I sit here in front of you today, our experience modification rate is a 1.07. So we dropped 10 basis points, and we're pushing right up into that average range. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't shoot for better, right? And try and get that below 1, because if we get it below 1, then we actually get a savings off of the current rates based on the employment classes that we have here in Faribault. So, long story short, the SFM rates for this year, so our premium actually went down by $15,765. Now that doesn't seem like a very, very big dollar amount, right? And at the end of the day, it isn't a really big dollar amount. But what I do want to share is that work comp dollars are based on every dollar we pay out in salary. And so every year, the more we pay out, the more raises we get hit with a more work comp premium. So our work comp premium went up, our dollars went up by a little over $2 million from one estimate to another estimate. And we still save $15,000. So just kudos to Carrie and Kane and Craig. They're doing a lot of work in this area to drive down that EMR rate and save us some dollars, as well as keeping our faculty safe as well.
Very good. Questions or discussion? I would like to say kudos to Kane and the staff of the things they've put into place to make sure that this gets down or is driven down here. It's a good savings. So, any further discussion? Further discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Sorry, John. I would just chime in real quick that we are still working on the property and casualty that we'll bring to you in June. That will not be such a positive response as what we have here today. If any of you have renewed your homeowner's insurance, you can relate to what we're looking at in terms of the district operations.
Right.
So there'll be significant increases there, but more to come. We're still working through a lot of things.
Good. So 10L, consider approval of the 2024 LTFM 10-year plan. Could I have a motion for approval of the 2024 LTFM 10-year plan?
So move.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Steves. Mr. Gertis.
So every year, it's a requirement of MDE that we have a 10-year plan that is approved by the Department of Education Facilities area to allow us to levy for our portion of our LTFM plan. For those of you that aren't aware, LTFM, long-term facilities maintenance, is how we pay for a lot of the ongoing expenses and repairs that we need to do on an ongoing basis in our buildings. Also covers some of the salaries of Carrie and Kane and Craig, as well as our HVAC technician and some of the lead building time that we move there and save from the unrestricted general fund. So if you can pull that up, I know that is a very small document on there. I did put the Excel document on there as well so that you can blow that up for the old eyes like myself who need that. But I'm just going to walk through real quick the different sections in here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but category 1 is consists of, you can see 6 finance codes, and the finance codes are used by the Department of Education to really separate out the different health and safety type things that fall into the portion of LTFM. And so, again, we got physical hazards, asbestos, environmental things, indoor air quality items, and fire safety. And so you can see base year 2024, and then we carry out 2025 through 2034, 10-year plan that we are going to submit for health and safety. One of the big things that we're going to be working on in this area is fall protection on all the roofs of our buildings over the next several years. For those of you who have not heard, OSHA seems to be wandering around the school sites in southern Minnesota lately, so we've got to be trying to get into compliance with some of these different federal OSHA regulations. We move down to category 2. Category 2 this year is new. For those board members, you remember we bonded for some health and, indoor air quality needs at 5 of our buildings. You can see that those expenses are splatted in there for fiscal year 24, 25, and 26, when they should all hopefully be completed. We move down to section 3A. We don't have anything in section 3A. Section 3B is new last year. We are required in fiscal year 25 to have gender neutral bathrooms in all of our buildings, and so we're in the process of converting those. Some of those are done already at the secondary sites, and we got a little bit of work to do. Don't have a huge cost there because, again, we're just reassigning bathrooms, but there will be some signage and some other requirements that we need to do in that area. We don't have anything in the way of accessibility in category 4. Category 5 is kind of what we would refer to as all of our building repairs and needs in that area. So in fiscal year 24, our current year, we're currently working at Roosevelt Elementary, wrapping up the new boiler and chiller there. That project is about complete once we can get some warm days here strung together and test the load on the chiller. As we move into fiscal years 25 and 26, we're replacing a couple other chillers at a couple other sites. Fiscal year 27, I point this out because we talk about Nearstrand. Nearstrand, we need to replace the boiler at Nearstrand, so we currently have that estimated in fiscal year 27. That's a $400,000 expense under the FIN code 380 mechanical systems. And then moving forward from there, we're looking at really some classroom remodels and some things that we need to get done in our classrooms that kind of take back seat to all of the other mechanical issues that we have to replace going forward. Couple board meetings ago, you heard Kane talk about the glycol issues for these adjustments. That's also coming out of the LTFM plan for fiscal years 25 and 26 to put in new glycol into the buildings. We move down to the bottom, you'll see kind of just a running total, right? A running total of estimated revenue, beginning fund balance, again, estimated revenue, both in terms of levy and aid, and the first 2 lines, expenses on the bottom line, and ending fund balance moving forward across all 10 years through fiscal year 2034. The other thing I would just say is knowing that this plan is about as accurate as the time it took me to read it to you this afternoon, so keep in mind that this thing changes constantly, so this is a point in time. Any other questions on the 10-year plan?
Questions or discussions, board members? Questions or discussion? Discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Gertis, for all your work here. Appreciate it so much. 10M, consider approval of third-party medical assistance billing contract for Teresa Rome for fiscal year 2020, fiscal year 25. Mr. Daynard, please. Well, Mr. Daynard's coming forward. Could I have a motion for approval of the third-party medical assistance billing contract for Teresa Rome?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Do we have a second? Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. Mr. Daynard.
So
Each year, third-party billing is revenue that the special education department can bill to Medicaid for medical services that are required by an IEP. So for example, if a student has speech and language services in their IEP, speech and language services are a medical service, so we can therefore bill Medicaid if the student qualifies for Medicaid. Similar services are personal care attendant services, things like bathrooming, toileting, feeding, helping students do those things when they're not age appropriate. So if we have a high schooler who needs feeding, we might have a personal care assistant helping them to feed, and then we would be able to get that reimbursed. So we're required to bill Medicaid for these services, and so we do. In order to do that, we've hired for the past, probably 15 or more years, Teresa Rome. And ironically, we just looked at the contract again, and she's charging us $23,000, which is the same thing she's charged for the past 5 years, so, which is nice for us. Just in perspective, when I started keeping track of third-party billing revenue in fiscal year 2017, we brought in about $450,000. This past year, we brought in $703,000, and we're expected to bring $750,000 in this next school through that third-party billing revenue. So for that $23,000 and the work she does to help document and our teams keep track of it, we're getting quite a substantial rate of return on that. Most of that money is then put back in to help subsidize some of the special ed services that we provide, mostly in healthcare benefits for our teachers. It doesn't cover everything, but it does cover a nice chunk of that service. So I can certainly answer any questions if you have any.
Mr. Daner,
Yeah.
I'm really into the weeds here, but did you say 23,000 or 22,000? The document says 22,000.
22,000,
Okay,
I'm sorry.
thank you.
Any further questions?
Keep up the great negotiating.
Yeah.
Further discussion? Further discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Dainert. 10N, consider approval of 2 additional FTE EL teachers in fiscal year 24-25. Could I have a motion for approval of 2 additional FTE EL teachers in fiscal year 24-25?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Do I have a second?
Second?
Thank you, Ms. Steves. And I will turn it over to Mr. Dainert again. And Ms. Schultz, sorry.
Am I going to be able to control the screen, or? Okay. I invited Ms. Schultz up here to help talk about the need for the 2 FTE that we're requesting for the high school. So before we do that, I'm going to give you kind of an overall perspective of how English language learning is funded in Minnesota, just so you have some background knowledge. I always feel, as a former teacher, it's helpful to have some background knowledge so you know where we're coming from. These charts here are the first one in gray is from the state of Minnesota, and that's our average EL population, English learner population through the state, as well as special education and free and reduced lunch. One of the things you'll notice right off the bat that this average is around 10% for the state of Minnesota of students who are considered EL, and in Faribault it's about 25%. Without my glasses, I'm kind of like Scott apparently. So that's quite a big difference in the amount of students with English as a second language that we serve. So right off the bat, Faribault is very unique in that instance. This is a graph on the district's, sorry, I switched there and it doesn't switch on my computer screen. This is a graph over the last 5 years of the new EL students or the multilanguage English learners that have entered Faribault Public Schools. So as you can see, in 2017 we had about 107. In 2020 was a low point, and then we're quite rapidly going back up in the number of multi-language English learners that we serve, at rates that we have not seen before in Faribault. So these are new EL students, multi-language English students that we're serving in Faribault. Yes, please, hold please.
So I'm going to give you a little bit of EL jargon or acronyms that we use in the field quite a bit. We have two types of English learners in Faribault. We have long-term English learners, we call them LTELs, and then we have recently arrived English learners. These are also referred to as newcomers. The state of Minnesota has moved to calling them recently arrived language learners. So as we're going through this presentation, we're going to refer to both of these types of learners. If we switch to the next graph, this graph is a little bit deceiving. It looks like I'm comparing 3 years. I'm actually not. This is actually covering the change that has happened over the last calendar year, from last spring until now. So in the past, we've talked about the different language levels. The newcomers are at the beginning, the entering level. Level 3 is at the developing stage. You can see it there. You can see last spring, most of our students were in that developing category. They required less EL service than our newcomers do. You can see now that the greatest amount of growth is in that entering category, the newcomers. We're seeing exponential growth there. We're also seeing a decline in that level 3 developing group, and we'll talk about that here in just a little bit.
So we're going to back up and talk a little bit about how EL programming is funded in Minnesota. There are 3 revenue streams that provide funding for our EL programs. The first is federal money in the form of a Title III grant. That's a grant that the federal government gives to the state of Minnesota, and then the state of Minnesota divides that up based on the student population of EL in their district. And I'll go over numbers on the next slide, so I'm just going to kind of explain what the buckets are and then talk a little bit more detail about how this affects Faribault. The second bucket is the basic EL allocation. During the last legislative session, and maybe I should say this different because the last legislative session just ended. During the 2023 legislative session, the legislature increased the basic allocation from $704 per EL ADM to $1,228 per EL ADM. So they almost doubled the amount that they're giving for each EL student. We also have a third bucket of money that's the EL concentration revenue. So districts that have a higher proportion of EL students in their district than the state average, which as you saw on the first slide is Faribault, that's one of the things that we have, also qualify for EL concentration revenue. They increased the EL concentration revenue from $250 to $436 during that same legislative session. Beginning in 2027, MDE will begin reimbursing 25% of the EL cross-subsidy, and the 25%, at the time they passed the legislation, they said that that was the minimum that they were going to do, but they would re-look at that cross-subsidy based on the amount of money they had in the pot and the actual cross-subsidy, because up until this school year, districts tracked, because there was no reason to track the EL cross-subsidy, districts really had EL in a lot of different buckets. Sometimes EL teachers were paid out of Title III money, sometimes EL teachers were paid out of free and reduced money, so they didn't really track it separately, and districts just made do and put it in whatever pot made sense at the time. Faribault was one of those districts, so a lot of our EL funds or our EL budget expenses are intertwined with different funding streams, which makes it difficult to calculate a cross-subsidy when you have all these things tangled together. So what the Department of Education did this year is they asked districts to start moving over those object codes for all those expenses to a specific EL expense account so that they could more clearly track what the cross-subsidy is, so that they could find some real numbers and develop cross-subsidy aid based on real numbers instead of what they kind of thought the numbers were. Another caveat to EL funding is that EL students can only generate revenue for up to 7 years in the country. So while students' needs don't end at year 7, the funding for them does end at year 7. So we have a number of students who have been in EL programs for 8, 9 years, And they still require services for the EL department, but there's no revenue for the students to receive those services. So this is the student count in Faribault, and I've broken it apart into 3 different years, 22, 23, and 24, also by students served, students generating revenue, and then students not generating revenue. So you can kind of see the difference. So in 22, we had 824 students generating revenue, which is quite a bit. Then in 23, it went down to 742, and in 24, it's kind of leveled out at 744. That means that there are more students not receiving revenue. So our expenses are going up, and the revenue we're bringing in for students is going down because the students are aging out of their ability to generate that fund, and we're getting a lot of newcomers in who require more and more services. So it's kind of a balancing act between, we have 88 newcomers that came into the country, but we also had 80 students that stopped generating revenue. Unfortunately, the ones that stopped generating revenue were the less expensive students. The students who are coming in are more expensive, and now we have less of a bucket or a foundation to. So it's kind of a balancing act. These are the actual dollars that we have that we're spending that we're earning and spending in Faribault for our EL population. So in 22, we had revenues of about $500,000. The concentration revenue was 182, and the Title III revenue is 129. So the total revenue was $826,000. And again, with the caveat that we weren't necessarily we were keeping track of revenues, and so we'll talk about expenses on the next slide. So you can see in 23, with less students, the basic revenue went down, the EL concentration revenue went down. The title revenue did increase. The title revenue, federal money, is often based on last year's child counts, so it's kind of a year behind in the way they finance it. So that's why that went down. So we generated less revenue, $782,000. And then in 23, 24, because of those differences in the amount that the state is now reimbursing or giving us as basic revenue and EL concentration revenue, our revenue actually almost doubled from the previous year. That's not because we had more children. That's simply because the legislature put more money into these buckets, and Faribault, having a significant EL population, was the beneficiary of that. So this is how that revenue looks compared with our expenses to try and calculate or kind of give you an estimate of what our cross-subsidy might be. Given that it's not an accurate number, it's just kind of maybe for reference there. Our EL revenue during 22 was $800,000. We spent about $1 million, a difference of $204,000. That would be our EL cross subsidy. In the next year, we had about $782,000 in revenue. Expenses increased to $1.1 million, almost $1.2 million, and our cross subsidy increased to about $400,000. In 24 is the first year where we have a clearer picture of where our expenses are actually happening, and we're tracking them much better. Scott has done an excellent job changing those UFARS codes, so we're much better at tracking it. We did have an increase up to $1.6 million, but we also had an increase, or our EL expenditures are accurately looking at about $1.6 million, with the caveat that this was done, but right before the finance meeting, I ran the report, and it's past our budget already. I think Scott had budgeted $1.3 million for EL expenses because we didn't know what it actually would be, and it's already in May of 2024, 1.6, and we still have June and July to go through. So I anticipate it will probably be closer to 1.8 when it's finally said and done. And the difference between the 1.6 and the 1.8 is what we would have as our cross subsidies. So there is a cross subsidy. The good news is that they're starting to track it, and we're tracking it more accurately, and they're going to use next fiscal year, 25, as the first tracking year so that they can develop their cross subsidy reimbursement. And now I'm going to toss it back to you.
So I'm going to get into the program element of EL. We are required by law to have a language instruction education plan posted for how we are going to teach our EL students English. And so this is posted. I'm going to talk first about Rails, the recently arrived English learners. Our goal with the Rails has always been that they have a 4-year grad track. So they are able to start and end school within 4 years, just like every other student. So I'm going to show you elements of the program placement for Rails. I'm talking about at the high school in this instance. You can see in year 1 that the Rails take 4 EL hours per day to learn English. The classes are listed there. We currently have 38 students in year 1 at the high school. We also have an additional 11 at the middle school that will be coming into 9th grade. So for next year, we'll have 49 students needing year 2 programming. And if you look over to the right, you can see that year 2 programming actually requires more EL hours than year 1. We move up to 5 EL hours for year 2. Because we have 49 kids, we can't put all of them in the same classroom and run 1 track of year 2 programming. We're going to run 2. That allows us some room for growth and also for more consistent and better language development. If you look down at the bottom, we currently have 12 students in year 2 plus 5 8th graders coming over from the middle school who will need year 3 programming. So that equals 17 students who will then need year 3 programming next year. You can see that in year 3, again, the Rails will need significant EL support in order to get through those content classes. That's when they start the major push towards getting those content credits. All of their classes are co-taught with a content teacher and an EL teacher in the same classroom. And then in year 4, we back off some of that EL support as they should be able to do more of it on their own. What we're running into right now is that our current FTE at the high school, we have 4 FTE. We're using all of those to cover the increased needs of the Rails only. That's all we are able to cover with what we have currently. We need 20 hours to cover their needs, which equals 4 FTE. So then that brings us to the next slide. I worked closely with Mr. Olson, the principal at the high school, and his administrative assistant, Aaron Lazinski. Huge shout out to them. If you've never tried to figure out a high school schedule, oofta, it's a lot. So Aaron sat down with me and we worked through how we could build a system that would get enough support for everyone at the high school. Again, I said earlier that we have 20 hours that covers the Rails. That's all the 4 FTEs that we have. We would need 10 additional hours to cover the LTEL needs, those long-term ELs, many of whom we no longer, as Mr. Dennard said, get revenue for, but they still require service. So thinking about the LTELs, you can switch to the next one. Our long-term ELs, they've been in the program for more than 5 years. I want to be really clear that this is a nationwide phenomenon. This is not unique to Faribault. Almost all districts are working with long-term ELs. We're not sure why they don't advance to the exit level, but they don't. Lots of theories, lots of research being done in that area. EL service is still required. This is where we have been out of compliance over my tenure here. It's my goal that next year we are in full compliance K-12, and this is the last element that we have to put in place. We've had to pull all of the service away from the LTELs in order to cover the newcomers or the Rails in the last couple of years. LTELs only require 1 co-taught class, co-taught content class. So they need to be in a classroom with a licensed EL teacher and a licensed content teacher. We currently have about 100 LTELs who are not receiving EL service of any sort at the high school. And that's what we would like to rectify. Co-taught classes have to be a 50-50 ratio at most. We can't just put all the LTELs in one classroom with an EL teacher and a content teacher. It begins to look like segregation and discrimination, and it is their right to be mixed amongst the mainstream students. So we have to keep that in mind when we're thinking about serving the LTELs. Also, if you go back to the slide where I talked about the Rails and year 3 programming, they require co-taught classes. So they start to mix in with those LTELs, and so that also makes us need more of those co-taught classes to meet the needs of both groups.
So that's why we're here today, to ask for an increase of 2.0 EL FTEs to cover the multilingual learners' needs at the high school level, as well as bring the district back into compliance with MDE. This would be an additional cost of approximately $170,000 to the district's general fund. And we certainly are willing to entertain questions that you might have.
Thank you for the presentation. Board members, we do have a motion and a second for approval of the 2 additional FTE EL teachers. Questions or discussion?
Mr. Bellingham, I just want to talk about, or real quick ask Ms. Schultz, a couple slides up, it talks, we're currently out of compliance. Is being out of compliance, I mean, I hate to ask this, but is that a finable offense or what? I mean, historically, right, when we've been out of compliance and it comes to the board, we do everything in our power to get in compliance. We don't want to be out of compliance. Can you just talk a little bit more about that, either yourself or Mr. Benty or whatever that looks like?
Yeah, I have never been through a Title III bench audit, so I think I've heard audits are scary, and I assume that it would be something that I wouldn't enjoy. But even more so than that, it is a right of our students to have this service, and so I think providing that service for them is what's right to do. And so I do think there are penalties to Title III funding. I know back a number of years I've heard of the Office of Civil Rights coming in and really digging into what we were doing with our language learners. So I think it's taken very seriously.
And I would say it doesn't start off as any type of financial piece. The audit is, this is what you need to fix, those types of things. But like Ms. Schultz said, it does open up the eyes and show, hey, this could be prime area for a civil rights violation, and then you are talking about substantial financial penalties, if depending on how that goes.
No, thank you. And obviously, it's a big cost that we were not anticipating, but I think this is why we always try to have a bit of a healthy fund balance, because these things come up, and just simply that, they come up. So thank you. I appreciate the information.
Ms. Boudreau.
I have a question for Ms. Schultz. I see that, I heard this presentation before, and thank you for doing it again. Our LTELs, I think you stated there was 100 not receiving the services that should be. Are they not receiving it because they're choosing not to participate? And also, we need to have parents opt them out in order to not be out of compliance. So is there some method that we could try to get parents to at least be asked, do you still want these services for your children, or are we doing that? I'm just looking for connecting that little loophole there.
Sure, great question. Every year we are required to notify parents of continued service. Parents are given the option to accept that service or to deny that service. We currently have about 30 students district-wide who are LTELs whose parents have opted them out. So that is an option. We have some dual identified ELs right now, which means they have qualified for special ed services and EL services, and we aren't able to make those 2 services work together well at the high school. And so we actually have those conversations with parents. Special ed needs need to be met first. So would you like to opt your child out so that they can get those services? And then EL will support as we can, but we don't always have that option. So parents are given the right to opt out.
Mr. Chairman, just the way it's set up, it seems to be awkward. I don't know how the question's asked in the survey. Do you want to opt out or do you want to opt in? I mean, parents going to respond differently on different days. So if it would help us to be more in compliance because they don't want to participate but yet haven't given us the opt-out, I think we need to focus somehow on that.
Mm-hmm. Parents, yeah. The parents, when the document that we send home is in compliance with statute. The statute is very clear about what it has to say. And then we have a box at the end where parents check yes or no. And so it's not an opt-out or an opt-in. We just do what the parents ask or require.
Thank you.
My experience is that parents of any culture want what's best for their child, and they feel that these services are going to help their child acclimate to America better and be able to get a job and to do all those things. And so they generally want the services because they feel that it's what's best for their child.
Great questions. Any further discussion? Further discussion? We do have a motion and a second for approval of the 2 additional FTE ELs with no further discussion. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
We'll move on to agenda item 10O. Consider approval of resolution number 24-33, rescinding the probationary staff non-renewed status for the 24-25 school year. This is a roll call item. Could we have a motion for approval of resolution number 24-33?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Do we have a second?
Second?
Thank you. Motion and a second. I don't see Ms. Yocum here. Mr. Benty, would you explain, please?
Yes, so these are 2 positions that opened up that we're able to fill with previous people that were reduced that we would like to have back. One of them is an internal transfer of someone into an open position that created an opening, and the second one is a resignation that allows us to bring someone back.
Very good. Questions or discussion? Questions or discussion? Last call for questions or discussion. Ms. Steves, roll call, please.
Linda Boudreau,
Aye.
Linda Moore,
Aye.
Cassie Steves, aye. Chad Wolf,
Aye.
John Bellingham.
Aye.
Says 5-0.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 10P, consider approval resolution 24-34, 2024-2025 resolution for membership in the Minnesota State High School League. This is also a roll call item. Could I have a motion for approval of resolution 24-34, membership in the Minnesota, 24-25 resolution for membership in the Minnesota State High School League?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Steves. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf, for the second. Questions or discussion? Questions or discussion, board members?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Boudreau?
I would just like to, excuse me, I would just like to say that when Title IX first came out, 1972, under President Nixon, it was wonderful. Girls could finally play and participate in athletic programs within their school. And I think that is very important to me. I wasn't able to enjoy that because it just wasn't there. And I would have liked to. And I just feel those opportunities are very important. They're very important to build team spirit. They're very important to build confidence. They're very important to potentially access, some kinds of awards or scholarships. And I would not want to eliminate that for any of our students. But I would also say that parents and students need to be aware of the Minnesota State High School League rules, code of ethics, and what expectations are there for them before they decide to participate. It is up to the students and the parents to make those decisions. It's not up to the school board here to deny those opportunities to our students. And that is my view, and I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. Further discussion? Just from my viewpoint status, the Minnesota State High School League does so much more than state tournaments and section games, et cetera. It's the fine arts, speech, one-act plays, whatever they're awarded to state. They also give excellence for academics. I believe they're Excel award winners, which you're involved in activities, and you're also a high-functioning student as well. So it's as Ms. Boudreau says, it provides deeper opportunities for our kids, for all our students, and obviously former coach here, et cetera. I would support this totally, so with that. So any last call for questions or discussion? This is a roll call item. Ms. Steves, if you would, please.
Linda Boudreau,
Aye.
Linda Moore,
Nay.
Cassie Steves, aye. Chad Wolf,
Aye.
John Bellingham.
Aye.
Passes 4-1.
Thank you. Agenda item 10Q, reorganization update. Mr. Benty, a report.
So not a lot to report. This is a standing item that we have on our board agendas, but we will have our first reorganization meeting. We've got 33 people that have signed up to be. We'll see how many show up, but our first meeting will be this Thursday in this room at 5:30. Yes, so I don't have my calendar up in front of me. So that'll be our first one, and we're looking to do about 6 of those. And sticking with the timeline of reporting to the board in August.
Excellent. Thank you. Item number 11, dates to remember, June 2nd, 2024, 2 p.m. graduation ceremony at Faribault High School. June 3rd, 2024, 5:30 p.m. work session here at District Office. June 17th, 2024, 7:30 a.m. Finance Committee, that's virtual. And June 24th, 2024, 5:30 p.m. our regular board meeting. All I can think of is where did May go? My goodness, it's gone. So item number 12, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Do I have a second? Thank you, Ms. Steves. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. We are adjourned. Thank you all.